Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Olha, and I'm happy to see all of you here in Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform. We invited you today to talk about a very important topic, to bring it up and discuss it with you. Is the topic of implementation of the gender policy in law enforcement agencies of Ukraine upon the resolution of the United Nations Council Resolution 1325, which implementation is foreseen up to the year 2025. Our speakers today are Kateryna Levchenko, Government Commissioner for Gender Policy, Oksana Grigoryeva, Gender Advisor to the Commander of the Army of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Olha Perunova, Head of the Department for Gender Equality of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, Yuliya Maligonova, Head of the Gender Equality Sector of the State Emergency Service of Ukraine, and Iryna Zalyalova, Head of the Department for Monitoring of Gender Equality and Coordination of Efforts to Combat Domestic Violence under the Human Rights Compliance Department of the National Police of Ukraine. So let's start this conversation. Why implementation of this United Nations Council resolution is important for us, given the conditions of the war, the martial law, and what does the government, the country do to comply with those gender rules that were serving as the basis for that resolution. Thank you for the question. Thank you for organizing this event. It's very important to us to communicate with the society, with the public, for us as the government, the representatives of the sector of defense and security. And I think that everybody noticed that all of my colleagues are either the heads or the advisors of the departments, names of which include gender equality. It means that the sector of defense and security really pays very serious attention to these matters. And there is no doubt that a question may arise: why specifically the sector of defense and security? For the sake of fairness, I have to say that the civil ministries work too in this area. This is a separate topic. We introduced the strategy of gender equality in education sphere recently. Yesterday we introduced the report on gender equality at state service, which was prepared by the State Agency for State Service. But today we're talking about the sector of defense and security. So if we look back in history, if we read some essays or works about the war, usually they say that the war has no female face, is the man business. So the situation in Ukraine that started more than 9 years ago, it fundamentally turned over the stereotype, because the women today are active defenders and they serve in all of the units in the sector of defense and security in the armed forces. And as of the summer last year, there were more than 50,000 women in the armed forces of Ukraine alone. And women are also very active in support of our defenders in the sector of economy, the sector of manufacturing. So to say that the women are passive victims of the war, well, it's not about Ukraine. And the international documents, including the resolution of the United Nations Security Council 1325 that was adopted in year 2000, it emphasizes the necessity of paying more attention to the role and place of women in the conflicts, in wars. And since we use the terminology of the resolution, in the post-conflict recovery. So what will be after Russia loses and there will be a peace treaty under conditions that both men and women fight for. And this is an important international standard that says that women should be taking part in the processes of decision making related to war and peace. They have a right to defend Ukraine, well, all their countries, including Ukraine, and that's the right which was in fact confirmed in 2018 when there were amendments made to the legislation which allowed the women without discrimination to take part or to enlist in the armed forces of Ukraine just in the same way that the men do. It says that women can take part in the negotiations, and on the other hand there is a number of questions related to the fact that in civil population which suffers from the war, usually the majority, more than 50%, are women who, under conditions of weakly working economy or non-working economy, I'm talking about the temporarily occupied areas or those along the forward edge of the battle area, they bear the burden of taking care of the families. So it all should be accounted in that policy, and to take into account the needs of the women. This is what the resolution 1325 is aimed at, and it's not only that but also a lot of sister resolutions, along with the national plan of actions that was adopted by the government in 2020. That was a new plan, but in 2022, in a view of new challenges, of new problems, they updated that plan in close cooperation with public organizations, non-government organizations. And if you look at the participants of our today's event, we all took place in updating this plan. So that plan was not written somewhere in the government offices, it was made public. And it's important for us to have this plan localized, and it is being localized because every body of the central government which is engaged in its implementation, they adopt their plans at the level of each region, and they finalize the process of adoption of these national plans. For example, on 4th of April, I was going on a business trip to Lviv, where on that day they had the military governor of the region signed the regional plan of actions, and so the process is underway, and it's important for us to comply with it. And we can do it when we have a team, when we have people, we have understanding, and when there is cooperation with the public sector and international organizations. Thank you, Ms. Kateryna. I think that there is no dispute that last years we see significant progress in this work. Ms. Oksana, that question will probably be to you. You, as a representative of the armed forces of Ukraine, and a structure which is being paid a lot of attention and honor at that time being, and on the other hand everybody keeps track of all the changes which are going on in this structure. So what was done to comply with the requirements of gender equality in the armed forces? So what was done and what is planned to be done in future? Well, really there are a lot of changes. First, the number of women on military service grew within the last year. This increase, well, it started back in 2014. It was the first wave, and another powerful wave started with the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And women who are enlisted at the moment, they are strong, motivated, fearless women who voluntarily took up the arms to defend their homeland. Obviously, many women are currently in the top level offices, and it's related to the amendments which were adopted in 2018 when the women were allowed to take commander roles. They were allowed to study at the traditionally male professions, and this year those women, those girls who started studying those professions, now they will be graduating as officers, and there is a trend to growth of the number of women in the officer corps. In the army there are 3,386 of them, and it's a very powerful force. So obviously we have something to take pride in. We see this progress, we see how our women express themselves every day. There is no gender discrimination, and now it's important for women to be a professional, to demonstrate their skills. But army grew several times, and new officer men were enlisted who are not familiar with the new amendments to the legislation, and sometimes some moments arise when they don't let the women go on the combat missions because they just don't know the legislation. So we try to communicate this information, we try to communicate it to the personnel and the commanders, of the structure units, that there is a plan 1325, what it is, how should it be complied with, and the work is underway. So now that the tasks that were traditionally fulfilled by the men, we have to prove every day that we are not different from men in terms of professionalism. So here the work is in progress every day, and also very important is the material in this view regardless of the martial law. There is some progress. We continue providing women with all the necessary materials so they fulfill their duties on par with the men. Well, thank you. I hope that the day will come that we will not have to prove anything to anybody, that those things would be obvious to everybody, and everybody understands that we got nothing to prove. But is there a way for you to engage any assistance, any support by the non-government organizations which are very powerful in Ukraine now? Are they being engaged in those processes? Can they help us? And can you give us some examples? Well, they always help us, and we really appreciate their input. If not for their advocacy that was existing since the beginning of 2000s, we wouldn't have had what we have now. And those laws adopted in 2018 on the gender equality, and that there is this titanic move in the sector of defense and security, it's only thanks to the civil organizations. I will never stop thanking them. And the fact that we continue those trainings for gender advisors, for example, in the army there are 142 gender advisors who consult, who assist some specific servicemen and servicewomen to solve their problems, but they should be trained because the legislation is changing. There are new things that we keep finding out about, and we keep engaging the civil organizations in these types of trainings. So because we don't have enough capacities ourselves, so there is a synergy in all the defense and security sector, including volunteer events. For example, in providing the military women with the hygienic products, with the women's body armor, women's uniform. It's only done at cost of the civil organizations, charity organizations. We want to thank them, and nothing would have happened without them. Miss Olga, the Ministry of Internal Affairs has 5 structures, in its organization, we understand the challenges which are being faced by your organization. Do you feel that there were some tectonic moves in your ministry too? Well, thank you for this question. I wouldn't talk about that period more than 5 years, because I work with this topic for 5 years, and we have had very significant changes within this period, specifically in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. It's a very big system which covers a number of areas of work, and sometimes one may think that migration processes, police, National Guard, and defense of the border are all different processes. Yes, there are differences, but with the help of my colleagues who were introduced by Ms. Kateryna, I can say that our team helped create this gender-oriented approach, and we don't now pay attention to the difference in our structures, and all the work is done from all the way from the bottom to the top, not only in our organization, but across the regions too. Well, the level of awareness is way higher in the regions now than it used to be 5 years ago. Well, it's globally speaking, but again, talking again about the institutional capacity is one of the first things to be paid attention to, because institutional capacity, the experts, they should be preserved, they should be motivated, because they are the ones who implement the gender policy, and institutional capacity is one of the most important aspects of implementation of gender policy, is the first component. And again, the level of awareness that Ms. Oksana mentioned, the staff potential is changing, and we continue to raise awareness on a daily basis. We pay special attention to the commanders, because they are entitled to make decisions, and those decisions should take into account the needs of both men and women. And even on the phase of preparation of this resolution, the gender component should be taken into account. So when it's legally effective, it should have taken into account the needs of both men and women. So do I understand it correct, that there is already a system in place that allows to train the commanders on their level? Well, as to the training, thank you. I again want to support Ms. Oksana. I want to thank civil sector, international partners. First, we addressed them with this question on raising awareness of our personnel. We didn't have enough resources to train, and we have a lot of personnel actually to cover all of them. Now we have trainers, we have advisors in every higher educational institution. We have advisors. It is the same person who underwent a number of trainings, who helps in implementing the gender policy, who implements 1325 on their level, all from top to the bottom, who takes into account the gender aspects in training programs, in study, in modules. So those are the trainers who are the result of the previous 5 years of work. And now all of us who are present here, well, there are no representatives of National Guard and State Border Service of Ukraine. So 3, 4, 5 years ago we started all together, and now we can be experts, to be able to say something, to consult, to tell what we do in our organizations, in our structures. Please, and I would also like to add that courses on gender problems, they became a part of the training programs for cadets and the students of higher educational institutions in the sector of defense and security. We were doing the monitoring of that training. Is going on. There are more and more prepared and interested professors in year 2020 under the patronage of Vice Prime Minister for European Integration. There was a textbook prepared that was called Methodical Recommendations on Implementation of Gender Approaches in the Preparation of Staff in the sector of defense and security of Ukraine. And what's interesting, that textbook was recommended to be used in training by the professors' councils of all educational institutions in the sector of defense and security. So we may consider it certified. So if you're interested, you can find it online. It's posted on the website of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine and central governments and educational institutions, because it was written by the collective of Ukrainian authors, both men and women. It has a very powerful potential that we exercise now. Miss Yuliya, I think that police always had the biggest representation of women in their organization, in the structure of the national police among all the bodies of defense and security sectors. So what do you do to implement the resolution of United Nations Security Council? Thank you for invitation. Why it's happened so? We didn't have such restrictions that existed in the armed forces, for example. The women could enter the higher educational institutions with no barriers. I can give you the statistics for the last year, for how many applications there were last year to study on the special conditions. It was 50-50, both men and women. More than 27% of women are now in the ranks of national police. On the commander positions, it's 16%. I cannot compare with other units. I'm responsible for mine one, but talking about the statistics, thanks to that textbook that was mentioned just now, I see it's a pretty high indicator, even comparing to the European countries. I mean, the number of female servicemen. I support Miss Olga in her words. We do everything together. Talking about resolution 1325, it's one of the most important among all other resolutions. And as to the agenda of women, peace and security, and national police is the central body of executive power who serves the society to ensure the public safety and security. It's our basic and fundamental functions to serve and to protect. To what extent do you feel the role of women and their influence, talking about the security and protection? The role of women seems to be very significant. The resolution itself says that the role of women in regulating the conflicts is very substantial. So to what extent is it implemented, and to what extent it works in the police? Or maybe there are some structural units. Well, yeah, talking about our internal structure, in the structure of national police, there is the Department for Compliance with Human Rights. Well, I could say a lot of things about that department, but we don't have a lot of time. So that department was created, well, there was a unit created which is called the Department for Monitoring Gender Equality and Efforts to Combat Domestic Violence. So we support all the actions on the government. We take part in implementation of 1325. We were taking active part in updating national plan. We have internal order which lists the tasks and operational goals. If you check the national plan, you will see that more than 70 measures should be taken by the national police. So national police is one of the co-executioners. We cannot stand aside. We develop the institutional capacity inside our agency, and we work with the people too, because here we're talking about the gender violence, the domestic violence, and police plays the most important role in those processes, specifically now during the full-scale invasion. Miss Yuliya, was the situation in the State Emergency Service of Ukraine? Good afternoon, thank you for this question. Well, our agency also is to rescue, is to save, and the role of women in those processes is very important, because there are rescuer women, psychologists, women, female chemists, female divers. For example, a woman is a commander of a diver unit. Specifically, women are those who were accepting the evacuation trains during the beginning of the full-scale invasion. They were providing support and assistance 24/7. The role of women is important, and the conditions of service are equal for both men and women. In higher educational institutions, the males and females can enter on equal conditions. We invite everybody, and I want to say that every year, starting from 2015, we exercise monitoring, and the number of women grows 1.5% every year in our service, thanks to the joint work, thanks to the information campaigns during which we mentioned the necessity for equal rights. We continue communicating that information to the public, and thanks to that, the number of women grows in the ranks of our service. Thank you. So with all achievements that we mentioned, we still understand there is a lot of work to be done. So let's talk about the existing problems that should be solved, that you feel that they are real urgent. And another thing I wanted to talk about, each of you as a manager, as a director, you probably you are being addressed by women who serve in your agencies. What do those women say who address you? Let me start. Obviously, there is a vast amount of problems, but I want our spectators and listeners to understand that we are on the go, we are in permanent dynamics, in movement. Now that I hear that there are no restrictions for the women, for the girls to enter the higher educational institutions in the sector of defense and security. I remember in the beginning of 2000s there were 10% quotes. Now many people don't even know about this. Or in famous resolution that was signed by Mogilov, the Minister of Internal Affairs of Yanukovych times, the women were banned from studying in higher educational institutions of the Ministry of Internal Affairs system. There was a wording that second grade should be enlisted on the army service, should be drafted, and according to national legislation only men could be drafted, so only boys were accepted on the first year of study. It was a discrimination. It was kind of veiled, camouflaged, but it existed. But thanks to the women who took up the arms to defend Ukraine, they initiated those changes in the sector of defense and security. And only back in 2019, the girls were admitted to the study in the military and naval lyceums 4 years ago. In year 2020, there was only the first wave of children who went to study there. So every time we identify the existing problems. And talking about the problems of today, I will put it in generalized terms, and you, dear colleagues, will tell more details about your sectors. So those problems are related to the stereotypical perception of women in the society, by the society itself, and by certain personnel in the sector of defense and security. And our information campaigns are important here, and the examples of specific women who are enlisted. I want to thank everybody who defends our country today, everybody who undergoes the military service, and I bow my head in front of those who perished so we can build fair, democratic and free country today. So it's a question, it's a matter of changing our point of view. Those are important things. The professional training. Today, well, Miss Iryna, back on Monday, we've opened a very important training for the policemen, which was dedicated to countering sexual violence during conflict. And remembering your words as the philosophy doctor and as the professor, there is a lot of things to study even today. Even if we know a lot, it doesn't necessarily mean that our knowledge is enough. So improving our knowledge. Today, the security service of Ukraine is not represented here, but in cooperation with the National Academy of the Security Service of Ukraine, we developed the methodological recommendations for the victims of sexual violence resulting from the armed aggression of Russia in Ukraine during stabilization measures and investigations. So it's a pocket format, so it can be carried by the specialists with them on themselves, and we want to create such issues for every agency in the sector of defense and security. Those are the new formats of training. The material, it is improving. I hope there will be no parades where well, first of all, there will be a formation of women, and they will march wearing heels. Well, because it's not about that. The material is being improved, but there is no limit to perfection, and I would like the women to have comfortable uniforms, and it should be accessible and standard absolutely to everybody. And there is no doubt that we should continue talking about unification of family and professional duties. Soldier is a call. It's our profession, it's our occupation, and it's important that people who give their lives for the country, for the state, it's important for them to be able to join their professional duties with their family duties. We should continue working in this field, developing infrastructure for the people, for the adolescents, for the elder ones, so that the burden of taking care of the families, which is traditionally on the shoulders of women, so it is being taken by the society, and every person can continue developing themselves. It's not a holistic list of problems. The main problem is to oust the enemy from our homeland so we can build the country further on. If anybody has anything to add, please take the microphone. Miss Kateryna said so many good things. I only want to mention the applications that we get. They don't have some mass nature. There is nothing to be segregated as the special subject, but if we are being addressed by the women, the main issue is, for example, that the women are not being let out on combat missions, but in view of the trend, they are those women who joined the army after usually their husband or their son or their brother perished. And the commanders, they are a little bit afraid that those women are motivated to have revenge, but they don't have enough combat experience. There are also other applications from the pregnant women, but they are still cannot live on a maternity leave, and they are in hard points and they want to get transferred to safer places, so we try to solve those issues too. Other matters that we try to solve regarding the material, thanks to the volunteers, we cover those needs 100%. Again, the hygienic products, body armor, women's uniforms, we keep receiving some materials that we deliver to the forward edge of the battle area directly, or to the military units, to the military bases. We want all the women in the sector of defense and security to be provided with women's uniforms. We hope that we achieve it shortly. Currently, the Ministry of Defense tests the women's uniform. There is no adopted standard for the time being. It's not yet centralized, but I'm convinced that by the end of the year, this process should have been launched. Also, I'm happy that this year we don't have any single application about sexual harassment. The one we received last year, it was not confirmed, because previously there were, for example, in the mass media, there were news about such cases of non-standard discrimination of the sexual nature. I don't have any single application like this recently, and everybody keeps working on the defense, and the women express themselves, as you know, as the combat units. So there are no reports of that nature. As to the discrimination, what else can I say? Sometimes the medical aid is not sufficient. I mean, gynecologists, there are no military gynecologists. It's not convenient, because sometimes the women end up in the forward edge or closer to the forward edge. They don't have an opportunity to visit such doctor, and obviously they address the civil hospitals, and there may be some logistic problems arising. We try to get involved in those processes. We have a lot of proposals by the civil hospitals who provide all the assistance for free, and we use that opportunity for cooperation with civilian medical institutions. If you have anything to add, please go ahead. Just a couple of words, really, because Ms. Oksana touched upon the topic of discrimination, of sexual harassment, so I just wanted to give a small remark that 2 years ago it was a real problem in the law enforcement agencies de facto, because we had because the matter of reaction to sexual harassment was not regulated back then. Thanks to the colleagues, thanks to all the team, we made amendments to the legislation which regulates the service investigations in all of our Ministry of Internal Affairs agencies, and also it touched upon the behavior of the servicemen, and the commanders should react in a way of initiating the service investigations. There are some may not have paid attention to it, and if there is a committee created, such committee should include representatives of gender equality units, so they take objective, fair resolutions upon taking the final decision on that service investigation. And now there is another phase. First is to train the personnel to identify the cases of sexual harassment. because it's a problem, because for somebody it may be a standard, a norm, but if you check the legislation, that's the violation of law. And there should be a system of monitoring for monitoring such changes, so we take into account some shortcomings during monitoring of such cases, and so we can improve. The institutional changes are also very inspiring when they're being implemented across the whole system. Ms. Kateryna, I think the question will be to you. I think that it's no doubt to anybody that our victory will be coming shortly. We will have a difficult process of recovery ahead. So how the gender equality should be put in the context of our recovery, post-war recovery? Thank you. You know, this program of recovery of Ukraine, which was developed and is being developed, I think it's a live process, because we cannot adopt one plan that could be unchanged. It should take into account the gender component. Well, there are certain areas which take into account that component. The experts were working on that, and their regional centers and independent expert team, which was created upon my initiative with the support of European Union, the Agency for Gender Equality in Ukraine, and thanks to the activity of the civil society, the principles of recovery that were adopted last year during the conference, which was called the Ukrainian Recovery Conference. It was taking place in Lugano. All of our donor countries, partners, were taking part in that. So this policy includes the item on gender equality policy. So how it will be implemented, it depends on those who sits with us here today, those who take part in all those actions, because every activity, every managerial decision being taken by the central government or regional administration, municipal administration, it should take into account gender component, because talking about people in general, it's very good, but it's better to talk about the problems and needs of men and women. And in a practical life and research, everything shows that there is serious difference. Also very important for us is not to postpone those issues for future, because today when we talk, for example, about reparations and compensation to the victims of the war crimes, we try to actively involve the victims of sexual violence, majority of whom are the women. And if we talk about the gender approaches, it does not necessarily mean that we only talk about women. It says that the different processes influence differently on men and women. The fact that we are different is not discrimination itself. Discrimination arises when the difference of needs is not taken into account. It's been nullified, and someone receives everything and someone does not receive anything or receives way less. So that's the difference which decreases the capability to exercise their rights. For example, today I was coming here from the government, from the meeting of the government committee for the recovery, and we considered inclusiveness matters there, and there is special section which says about the ensuring of gender equality, and this example illustrates that our documents, they include such component. There are unfortunately other examples when such documents don't include this component, and in this case we work with civil organizations, the Association of Women Lawyers. We were talking with them today about the necessity to amend certain legislative acts which are aimed at assessment of losses inflicted by Russia during war, and they are ready to develop the proposals with which we can address the government, who are the developers of that legislation. So that process, it requires professionalism on one hand and activism on the other hand, because if we know something but we don't use our knowledge in practice, it's a very doubtful baggage that would be very difficult to carry. And political will and institutional mechanisms, institutional structures are also very important to have all those changes to make them happen. Thank you for this conversation. I want to thank each of you for the work you do in your agencies. It's very important for us, and we continue working for our victory and trust in our armed forces, and glory to Ukraine. Thank you.